Welcome back to our beginners animation course. In the last part, we started our bouncing ball tutorial section of our course, going over some basic graph editor usage and creating a basic animation with a ball bouncing across the room. We have our ball bouncing, and if we hit play, we can see it bounce. We still want to kind of adjust some of the timing. We can see that these two bounces in the beginning are kind of long, and then they kind of get sharper and quicker at the end. We want to kind of simulate the ball kind of running out of steam as it comes to the end of its run. So right now, the Translate Z channel, if we select it in the channel box area of the graph editor, hit F to frame it, you can see right now the movement across the room is just a straight line from point A to point B with no change in speed. What we can do is have the speed slow down over time. So instead of just being a constant as it goes from point A to point B, we can have the speed kind of ramp downward. So select this keyframe on the far end, and we have this pink handle coming off of the keyframe. We can select it now with a little marquee selection. You can see it highlights yellow. Hit W to choose the move tool. I can then middle mouse click and drag and move this handle, adjusting the shape of the curve, like so. And I can then grab this one and do the same and adjust the shape of the curve here. So with this kind of slope, we can rewind our scene and see what we get. You can see what we get here is the opposite of what we actually want, where it's slow at the beginning and kind of speeds up as it gets to the end. So with that in mind, let's grab our handles and go the other way, like so. Then hit rewind and play. So we're getting closer to what we're looking for. The ball starts faster, then it slows down, and we need to adjust the bouncing as well as the timing of all these things. But we do want the ball to kind of come to a stop, kind of slow down as it gets to the end. We just need to adjust how high the ball bounces, especially right here toward the end. It bounces a bit too high right there. And for the speed, we can continue to adjust these handles to get the kind of speed you like. The higher the plateau on this hill in the graph editor, the quicker within the animation that the slowdown starts to happen, and also the faster it will be at the beginning. Fine tune it to get the speed you like. So something like this. Looks like this first bounce is pretty good, but then all these bounces after that need to be adjusted in height and such. So let's look at the Translate Y channel now. Hit F to kind of frame it, and you can see the bouncing motion here with our animation curve. So let's select some of these. Let's select these three keyframes here, which are the topmost arcs of these last three jumps here, last three bounces. So hold down middle mouse button, click and drag downward. And we don't want this third jump to go below the ground. Let's kind of see how that looks. So the second jump I think is too long. It's taking a bit too long to get from here to here. It's kind of floaty. If we grab all these keyframes, press the R key for the scale tool, then I can middle mouse click and drag and scale like this. So I'm kind of foreshortening the bounce. And because we're moving the last keyframe over, the ball will actually kind of roll across the floor a little bit toward the end, because the Y motion or the up and down motion stops before the Z motion or the left to right motion stops, because we've moved these keyframes over, and now it just kind of drags slightly across the floor, which actually work out pretty well. So middle mouse click and drag over like so, and then we can press W for the move tool again and move our keyframes over like this. So it just takes a little bit of adjustments with our timing, moving our keyframes. That looks a little better. So see, with some adjustments, some scale, some timing changes, we can get our bouncing ball to look a bit better as we continue to play with it. It drags along the floor toward the end, that's fine. We can have the ball kind of roll to a stop. This bounce here could be a little bit lower. Let's kind of lower it down a little bit. This is all kind of just looking at it and making adjustments based on your perspective on what you think the ball should be doing. This first jump could even be considered a little floaty still. You can, of course, continue to tweak yours and get it looking exactly perfect the way you want it. And you can obviously tweak any animation for hours, trying to get it to look just right. So let's save our scene. I'm going to save this as my bouncing ball 1. I'll go ahead and do that now. And now that we've saved that, I want to show you another way of doing the bounces with the ball. What we did here, we had keyframes set when it hits the floor, and then also keyframes set at the apex of the jumps that it makes. What I want to try and do is select all of the jump keyframes, all the keyframes that are up in the air, and delete them. So we get our kind of flat line through here again. We still have our keyframes set for when the ball is hitting the floor. It looks like these keyframes I accidentally shifted down slightly because instead of a value of 1, they're now a value of 0.891. So I can click those here in the stats box, type 1, hit enter, and it will move all those keyframes up to a proper 1 unit high. The reason why we're using 1 as a translate Y value as opposed to say 0 for placing the ball on the ground is because the ball itself is 2 units high, and the pivot point, which is the point that we're moving, is in the center of the ball, which would be 1 unit high. And so when we move the ball up to the 1 unit mark, the base of the ball, I'll zoom in here so you can see, is then set on the ground plane. If we position the ball at 0, it would actually be placed halfway through the ground. So moving it up to a translate Y value of 1 places the ball directly on the ground plane, in case you were wondering about that. So what I'm going to do now, we have all these keyframes set for our ball hitting the ground. Let's select them through here, and then in the graph editor, I'm going to go to Tangents, Break Tangents. And what this does is, you'll notice I did not break the tangents of this keyframe at the beginning. If I grab this handle and rotate it, you'll see that the opposite handle reacts in the opposite way. When I move this handle upwards, this handle is moved downwards. It's like a seesaw. Move this handle down, this handle goes up. I'll undo that. So now when I've broken all these keyframes tangents, if I grab this one, or let's say this one for example, you'll notice that instead of both handles being pink, one is pink and one is blue now. And when I grab one handle and adjust its position, the opposite handle on the other side of the keyframe does not change. So this way, I can grab this handle and move it up like this, and I can grab this handle and move it up like this, and we get a bounce effect without having to set a keyframe in the middle between the two ball landing keyframes. So the ball hits the ground and has an arc and hits the ground again without a keyframe set here in the middle of the bounce. So you can see as I hit play and scrub through this, the ball does a bounce just like you would expect, just like we had before, without having to set a keyframe in the middle between 15 and 39. And the reason why it's 39 now is because we did scale our keyframes inward some, which adjusted the frames that the keys were placed on. So instead of being at frame 40 or whatever it was before, it moved back one. Breaking the tangents of these keyframes allows us to move the handles on opposite sides of one keyframe independently, adjusting the tangent in and out of the keyframe without adjusting both at the same time. So with this handle again selected, I can click and drag and adjust its position and therefore adjust the animation curve's shape, getting this kind of result, again without having to have another keyframe set. So with this hill shape added into my animation curve, hit play, and you can see the result there. Let me zoom out so you can see the entire animation in our perspective or in our left side view. So now I'll do the same for the other keyframes. I can grab this handle and move it up like so, Do the same with the opposite keyframes handle to create the little hill or the little jump in our animation curve. I can do the same for the rest of these, and you can, of course, zoom in here if you need a closer look. And again, what I'm doing is I'm first selecting the keyframe, which is the little black dot, which displays the two handles for the tangency. Then I can marquee select one of the handles, middle mouse click and drag to adjust its position. I'll grab this handle, move it up, grab this keyframe, highlight this handle, and move it up, like so. Highlight this handle, move it up, highlight this keyframe, select this keyframe, highlight that handle, and then move it up, like so. And again, this is all without having keyframes in between the ground landing keyframes we've already set. So now we're just adjusting those tangency handles, I get this kind of result, and we can actually spike this a little bit higher, like this, on this end. So we get something like this. Let's rewind and hit play, see what it looks like. So again, we can adjust the heights of our little hills we've made by adjusting the positions of those handles on either side of the keyframes if we want, for example, these jumps at the end to be not quite so high. But otherwise, I almost think this one looks better than my first one without having to adjust these other keyframes at the heights of the jumps of the ball bouncing. We can simply grab these handles and adjust them. So again, if you think a hill is too high, we can grab these handles and kind of lower them down so that that hill shape of the animation curve is a bit more diminished. Same with this one over here. Kind of lower this down like so. So yeah, that's using another method of creating the jumping motion of the ball without having to set a whole bunch of keyframes. I think I want this hill to be a little bit more shallow. And you can adjust this to your heart's content. So yeah, that's two ways of getting the ball to bounce. One using keyframes not only when the ball hits the ground, but also having keyframes up in the air for the arcing motion of the bounce. And then this way, the second way, is by breaking the tangents of these keyframes and grabbing these little handles and adjusting the angle of the animation curve with them instead to get our bouncing motion. And again, don't forget we can highlight the translate Z animation curve and adjust its flow to adjust the speed of the ball going from point A to point B. You can even adjust the value of this keyframe at the end. Right now the value is around 61 or so. If you want the ball to move further across the room, you can simply increase this value to say 80, for example, and it goes farther. You see here, it's rolling off my screen now, which I think having a little bit more distance makes our animation look a little bit better. So it's all a matter of combining the bouncing motion with the distance you need and have that all look the way you want. So this part, I think we've kind of got our bounce the way we want it. I kind of like this one better than the first one, using the tangent handles to adjust our bouncing motion as opposed to having keyframes set for the arcs. I think you get better control over it with these handles. You can adjust for the heights of the bouncing as well as the spacing of the bouncing. You don't have to worry about so many keyframes when you adjust that. In our next part, we're going to look at adding a little bit more dynamics to our bouncing ball so it's not quite so static. And I think you'll see what I mean. We have that rolling motion at the end. We can actually add a roll to the ball so it's not literally perfectly up and straight up and down As it bounces across the room, we can add that spin to it, as well as squash and stretch to have that ball really add a bit more dynamics and pop to the motion. So that'll be what we'll talk about in our next part of our beginner's animation course. I hope you'll join me.